Now, Movi has been busy. Movi has been very, very busy. They released two new, I can't even call them handheld gimbal devices because one of them's definitely not handheld unless you have two people. But they released two new stabilization devices to be able to, I can't even call it a 3-axis gimbal either. It's just, they're just making new decisions that are taking themselves further than I think anybody really had the idea to be able to go. Aside from obviously the people at Movi who took them there. The first one is the XL. The Movi XL is a 3-motor major overhaul of the M15, of the Movi Pro, it's just an entire leg up. I mean, we're talking about even just the support on the side of this octagon square shaped stabilizer is probably about that thick. I mean, they're not messing around. This thing is called the XL for a reason. Now, what are the specs of it? What can it do? Well, the specs with this stabilizer are, anytime there's a company that ends up doing really, really well and is a very quality company, they don't give you this is where we pushed it to and then we couldn't get it any further than this, and so this is where it maxes out. They'll always give it this buffer room. They'll always take it back a little bit. And that's what Movi does because they're a really good quality company and they know that what they've designed can meet any expectations that you have of it. So the Movi XL can carry a rig up to 50 pounds. 50 pounds. That's, I mean, at Camera Ambassador we recently got in Hawk Anamorphics. Now these are heavy, heavy lenses. The 35mm comes in at 11.9 pounds. This could take that no problem. I mean, they had Panavision camera and a Panavision glass. I believe it was a 28 to 250 one there, and it could obviously easily handle that. And they also had a massive Kessler jib there, and that was only rated to 80 pounds. So you figure, okay, we have 50 pounds on the camera, 50 pounds up the camera, and then whatever's left over of the XL weight. We're probably maxing that jib out at about that point. Now the other thing with this stabilizer is that it also has the ability to resist wind very, very heavily. Now what I love about this is that they told me that, it's rated up to about 90 miles an hour. I was like, oh, that's really fast. That's great. And they're like, yeah, but we got it up to 120 and it was still doing fine. You know, that's the level of quality that I love about Movi, that I love about ARRI, that I love about these high quality companies, is that they know how far they can push that. And the reason I said that I love thinking about that is just because I know somewhere somebody's out there designing this rig and they're like, all right, let's go test this thing, and they're driving it at 120 miles an hour and it's still doing all right. Now the next gimbal that was released from Movi, and not technically released yet, but it was announced, and this thing was not easy to get to. All right, this thing was put up and away from anybody's arm's reach. I mean, they took it down for a second, and the guy even had his elbows out, making like they're very protective of this possibly prototype that they have for what is called the Movi Carbon. Now, in order to explain the Movi Carbon, I gotta kind of describe it from the inside out, because that's how I understand it. First off, we start with the camera and the lens that come with the rig. Now I know that sounds a little weird, but give it a second, because we're gonna start doing what I call the inception talk with this camera, and try to follow along. It took me a couple times to be able to do that. The internal camera that we have is the Sony A7S II. Mounted onto it is a Fujinon 24 to 240 mil lens. I don't know the aperture, I don't know what it stops down to, but that's the lens. Now, the A7S II has a technical ability to be able to move the sensor around a little bit to steady out your shot. So we have that first layer of stabilization, okay? Now, attached to the A7S II and the lens is an X and a Y axis. Just two axes. So now we have three methods of stabilization rather. We have the sensor itself stabilizing itself in steady shot mode. We have the X and the Y axis that are coming across and stabilizing the camera there. And then we have a housing that surrounds all of this. Now on the outside of this housing, we have three axes. We have roll, tilt, and pan. Now, these three axes stabilize the internal of the camera. All right, so these three axes stabilize the entire housing that's going on. So let's go over this again from the outside back in. We have three gimbals on the outside. On the interior of the housing for the camera, we have two gimbals on the X and Y axis, and then on the inside of the camera, if we have steady shot turned on, we have the sensor being able to move to correct for any corrections. So that means that we have the outside gimbals that are actually correcting any motion that you're making that's messing up. And then inside of that, inside of the housing, we have two other gimbals that are correcting any motion that those three outside gimbals could not fix. And then on the inside of the camera, we have the sensor that's finally fixing any corrections that the two inside gimbals were not able to fix. This is crazy. This is going to be an insanely steady camera. Now, another thing about this is that keep in mind we're dealing with a 24 to 240 lens, which means that technically on a full frame sensor, you could do a feature on that, no problem. You could definitely do that. And balancing, well, if the camera is set up and is secured, then we're not going to have to worry about balancing too much. That's going to be something that is able to be always set and always the way it's supposed to be. So I don't know, because obviously, like I said, we weren't able to see inside the housing. They actually had a sign on the back of the housing and it just said no. So whatever that means, I get a pretty clear picture, but I just figured I didn't even figure to ask. So what does this mean for visual storytelling? Well, what they described to me was not what I initially thought of, because I'm still thinking about using a MOVI as a MOVI, right? I mean, like, you get it for these shots where you used to use some form of Steadicam or some sort of dolly tracking or something like that. But this is how they described it to me. They said, imagine you're pushed all the way in at 240 and you're sprinting towards your subject who is way away. What's that gonna look like as you have this image just floating forward? I started thinking, I was like, yeah, that'd be interesting. That would, because it'd be so smooth, but you could move so quickly. And that's still thinking in the terms of a MOVI. And then they told me something that really kind of shook me up a bit, and I haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what this would mean for visual storytelling. And it's this. They said, well, imagine if you have somebody else in the foreground, very close to the camera. Then the viewer is actually going to realize just how far away this person is. And what's that going to mean, and how is that going to translate from the script to the camera to the screen? So I started thinking about that, and I don't know exactly the feeling that that's going to give because we haven't seen any footage with this camera yet. But I am very, very excited about this.